Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're pleased to be joined by Paul from Centurion Trust, who will be delivering a session titled, Are All Alternative Deposit Schemes Created Equal? If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to pop them in the questions box and we'll do our best to cover them at the end. Alternatively, you can email us at events@propertymark.co.uk and we'll ensure your questions are passed on to Paul directly afterwards. Without further ado, I'll now hand you over to Paul.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We plan to look at alternative deposit schemes, the current marketplace, the offerings, how they differ, what use it is to you, and also what you can offer to enhance the protection to landlords ultimately as well. Please do submit your questions. We do already have some submitted to us. There was an online form that you could have used for that, but any that come up, do pop them in the questions box and we'll cover them at the end. Before I begin, we have to have our standard disclaimer, I'm afraid. We are going to be talking about competitors in this presentation. All of the information we have has been taken from public sources or the competitors' own literature. Obviously, if there are any errors, then I'm happy to be corrected, and I will correct anything that people do bring to my attention. First off, a brief introduction. Nothing on the slide should be any surprise to anybody on this call today, but in very simple terms, there is 5.4 billion roughly tied up in traditional deposits. This is mixed between traditional, insured, as well as custodial. There is a large amount in this arena about what deposits mean to people, how they fund them, organisations doing surveys and other material issued. What is particularly interesting for me and probably the other providers we're going to talk about today is that nearly half of tenants are believed to borrow money for deposits. Now, whether that is through family, friends or credit cards, it's not quite clear. But what it is clear is that they are often paying interest on their deposits, and they also lose the use of those deposits during the term of the tenancy. So that 5.4 billion is tied up and the tenants do not see it, cannot use it, and this often leads to financial strains for the tenants. This financial strain won't be picked up in normal referencing, and therefore will go unknown until something happens, the tenant stops paying rent, or they can't make good on anything else that they have going on. It is also clear from the publications that tenants are becoming more savvy towards the end of their tenancies. Maybe they stop paying the last month's rent because they're concerned about what the landlord might be doing. Or alternatively, they start actually challenging the deductions that the landlord wants to bring. Either way, this is increasing the burden on tenants, landlords, as well as agents, because more processes are having to be done at the end of the tenancy. More startling for me was the number of formal disputes that were raised for the year ended March 2023. This stood at over 42,000 and was up by over 15% compared to March 2022. Unsurprisingly, rent arrears and cleaning appear to be the most common claims by landlords. So what do landlords say about this? Well, ONS released their survey in December 24, and this graph depicts what happened to the deposits at the end of the term. 38% of deposits, end of tenancies saw a claim on their deposits. More interestingly, 11% of the cases where a claim was made exceeded the deposit value held by the landlord or the schemes at the time. What strikes me as particularly odd by this survey is that 5% of all claims appeared to equate to exactly the deposit amount held by the landlord. Now, this isn't particularly clear to me how that could happen in so many cases, but I suspect that the landlord simply capped their claim at the value of the deposit, not wishing to have to claim more from the tenant. Landlords therefore are reporting a significantly worse position than traditional deposit schemes, or the alternative deposit schemes themselves are reporting in the marketplace. Landlords appear to think that there are more claims on tenancies and more claims above the deposit amount than either of those other parties are reporting. This might explain why in the same survey, over 40% of landlords said that they would consider alternative deposit schemes. This shows that landlords are looking for greater protection and they need to find where to get that from. One of the key things for us when we talk to landlords is that we often hear that they have never heard of alternative deposit schemes or never heard that they could acquire greater protection from alternative sources. This therefore means that we need to go through an education piece with the landlords and teach them what is there to protect their businesses, because after all, being a landlord is a business to them. So that's the landlord's view, and we must remember it was a small population that was surveyed, but I think it is representative of the landlords that we have spoken to. So what does the current marketplace look like? We have your traditional deposit providers. They're the insured, the custodial, so your deposit protection scheme, My Deposits, tenancy deposit schemes. Obviously, Scotland and Northern Ireland have different scheme names, but they follow the same format. These schemes have been the bedrock of traditional deposit protection and have been serving landlords well for years. What about the alternative deposit space? There are now 4 main players: Centurion, Flatfare, Reposit, and Zero Deposit. Centurion is the new entrant to the marketplace, and they are trying to bring a refreshed look to what is needed and how everything works and operates together. In addition to the third-party suppliers, a number of letting agents have started to run their own schemes. These schemes are not covered in today's presentation. However, we will touch on some anecdotal evidence that has been supplied to us from them and how they seem to deal with things. It is also clear that in the current marketplace, with the Renters' Rights Bill coming in, that there will need to be change, there will need to be innovation. And that is all going to happen relatively quickly between now and when the relevant parts of the bill come into play. We at Centurion see this as a great opportunity to redesign how landlords are protected from tenant defaults and to ensure that all parties are treated fairly, with no undue bias or excessive costs being incurred. And by costs, I also include locking away high levels of deposits when it's not required in this modern day and age. Let's look at the current alternative deposit offerings, and we'll start with eligibility and cover. Eligibility, by this we mean what references, what salary multiples, what checks need to be carried out, either by the agent, the landlord, or another party before the tenancy starts. All of the current schemes providers have very similar eligibility requirements. There is very little that differentiates them in the space. However, the requirement of who undertakes these checks can materially change between the schemes. Reposit and Flatfare both require independent third parties to carry out the checks and references. So in this case, the agent or the landlord cannot do them on their own behalves. It's got to be an independent party. Zero Deposit require an approved third party to be used, and they publish their list, and that's freely available. They will also allow parties to be added to that list on a case-by-case basis. So if you do have somebody you use that's not on the list, they can be added, but it is at Zero Deposit's discretion. Centurion, though, on the other hand, has come at this slightly differently. There is no requirement to use a third party. In fact, they will accept estate agents, lettings agents, as well as the landlords themselves undertaking the checks. However, the checks must be done to the required standard. It is important to remember that the moment a claim is put into any one of these providers, the first thing that the provider will do is check that the eligibility criteria and checks were undertaken and met the required standard at the outset. So for example, zero deposit, if you fail to use one of their approved suppliers, you may find that your claim is turned down. Likewise, if you have used a third-party independent supplier, however, the evidence around salary multiples or one of the references isn't quite up to standard and can be challenged and demonstrated that it wasn't performed properly, the claim may well be turned down. So it is very important that you keep proper records and maintain that degree of objectivity when you read these reports and obtain the relevant referencing. Turning to the level of cover. All schemes offer cover that equates to a number of weeks' rent. This is a common trend amongst all providers, which makes it nice and easy to compare. Zero deposit offers the lowest level of cover at 6 weeks. Reposit comes in second at 8 weeks, and flat fare and Centurion at 10 weeks. However, the headline number does not always tell the full story. Flat fare's 10 weeks does not provide you of 10 weeks worth of cover. For example, they cap rental claims, missed rental payments, at 5 weeks. So if you have a tenancy that ends and the last 2 months' rent weren't paid, you will not recover the 8 weeks' rent. You will only be able to recover up to 5. Therefore, you must take care and look into what that coverage actually gives you. On Centurion's side, 10 weeks means 10 weeks. There are no restrictions on its use. It can be used for missed rental payments, dilapidations, or any other item that could be recovered under the tenancy agreement. Having greater protection for landlords is great. But what about the costs? Is this where the tenant may benefit? The charges between each scheme vary considerably. However, each of them require annual renewal, and it is important that the annual renewal is undertaken. If we look at each scheme individually for a moment, zero deposit initial fee is 1 week's rent, plus an administration fee of £59.99. Their annual renewal fee is £17.50. Reposit is very similar. They look for 1 week's rent and an annual renewal fee of £30. Flat fare, on the other hand, have taken a very different approach. They charge 28% of the monthly rent plus VAT. As the vast majority of people won't be able to reclaim the VAT, this brings the initial charge out at 33.6% for flat fare. That is a significant upfront cost for the tenants compared to zero deposit and reposit. However, flat fare do not charge an annual renewal fee, so there's no ongoing fees to the tenants. It is a true initial fee, and that's it for the term of the tenancy. Care must be taken though. Flat fare requirement is still that you have to log on to the portal and renew the tenancy each year. That renewal therefore adds administrative burden to either the landlord or the agent, and there is no ongoing revenue share as there's no renewal fees coming in that you may receive a revenue share from. Centurion has taken a different approach again. The initial fees and annual fees are both based on rent bandings. For the initial fees, these range from £120 up to £300, and the renewal fee starts at £30 and goes up to £100. Centurion's view on this is that there are risk bandings within rental limits, and therefore setting a percentage that works across all rent bandings is very difficult. So having this banded approach makes it fairer for the clients as it equates to the risk of default from their side. This is all very well, but how does it work in practice, and what does it look like for different tenancy rates and lengths of period? The table now shows you a 1-year tenancy. This will show you the amount payable to each scheme and the cover. If we look at the £1,500 monthly rental band, the fees charged vary from £170 to £504. This is a great variation for the tenant. Ultimately, the tenant is going to be looking at the lowest cost. The landlord's going to be looking at the greatest coverage. So if you take the cost and coverage into consideration, surely you're going to look for the lowest cost and the most coverage. Centurion's fee structuring means that we typically see the lowest fee coming in for Centurion offerings at the 1 year point. Obviously, with 1 year, there's no renewal fees. So how do the schemes compare when you look at, say, a 3-year tenancy? Flatfare's pricing does not change, as they do not currently charge for renewals. However, all other schemes do. The pricing for monthly rent at the band £1,500 a month again is between £270 and £504. Centurion being the most cost effective, Flatfare being the most expensive. The closest competitor to Centurion is Reposit at £406. Now, Reposit only offers 8 weeks cover, which is 2 weeks less than Centurion, and costs £136 more than the Centurion offering over a 3-year period. It is worth noting that if you look at the lower end of the rent bandings, so £500 for example, Flatfare is cheaper than all of the other offerings once you take years 2, 3, 4 into consideration. And this is because they do not charge a renewal fee. So it is very important to look at each provider and make sure they are fit for the tenancies that you have. I know it's not very common, but let's look at a 5-year tenancy just to show you what happens for the longer term renters and how that may actually affect you. Again, Flatfare does not charge renewal fees, so their pricing stays the same. If we look at the 1,500 rental range again, the differences in pricing is £370 to £504. £504 is Flatfare, Centurion is at £370 again. Once again, Flatfare is cheaper if you move down to the lower end of the rental bandings because of the lack of renewal fees. However, if you look at the higher end of the rental bandings, so if we do the £4,500 rental, you can see that Flatfare is extremely expensive compared to the other providers. It is clear that even with longer term lets, Centurion offers the greatest cover for the landlords at the cheapest cost to tenants. Obviously, if you're down in the £500 monthly rental, this is not correct. However, we do need to remember that all of Flatfare's costs are paid upfront, so there's a greater upfront price to be paid by the tenant. So the tenant may prefer paying the annual fees to keep their costs down. Pricing and cover are all very well and good, but what about customer service, ease of onboarding, and claims processing? If we first look at the application process, Zero Deposit, Reposit, Flatfare all require the use of their portal. Either the agent or the tenant or the landlord needs to input the data onto the portal or have it dragged through their systems through APIs. In addition, they have to pay a direct payment to the schemes themselves. So the tenant has to input card details and that payment has to go through. The reason for a UK card payment being requested by these 3 schemes is very simple. Through the claims process, they can use that card to recover the money from the tenants. Centurion, however, offers a very different method. They have tried to remove themselves from the critical path. They have given the agent the power to commit Centurion to issue the guarantee and the power to collect the fee. This path means that the agent is in control of when the guarantee is issued, when that tenancy can start, and they're not reliant on the portal or a third party telling them that the fee has been paid or similar. This is a great benefit to the agent as it acts more like a traditional deposit and allows them to get tenants onboarded far more quickly, and they control the process. What about the claims process and end of tenancy? Again, zero deposit, reposit, flat fare all require you to use the portal to lodge your claims, deal with informal resolutions through those portals, and move matters forward. It is worth noting that the informal resolution side for reposit and flat fare, and I believe zero deposit, but I'm not sure, is all handled by the portal itself rather than human intervention. Centurion, on the other hand, has taken a very different approach. Whilst we have a portal, and the portal is available to anybody to use, we actually assign a claims handler, a person. That becomes the main point of contact for the tenant, landlord and agent. The claims handler will discuss the matter with each party, help gather the evidence that's required from them, and try and negotiate an informal settlement. This human approach typically finds better resolution than the portals do, in our opinion. Likewise, our claims handler will walk you through the adjudication process if that is required. So we'll handhold you all the way through the process, right up until submission to the adjudicator happens. All of the providers offer adjudication. However, the time frame for adjudication does vary considerably, starting from 14 days all the way up to 28. Care must be taken. Those days that are noted may be working days rather than calendar days, and therefore the time frame may expand considerably as far as the landlord is concerned. Centurion and Reposit offer the shortest adjudication period of 14 days, whereas flat fare is twice this at 28 days. However, the adjudication process is not the only timeframe to be looking at. You need to look at how long the total timeframe takes, the gathering of the evidence, the informal resolution. All of that needs to be considered. Zero deposit is very clear on this. Their process takes 45 days to complete. So you'll see a headline number of 20 days for adjudication for them. That is not as simple as it seems. You've got to look at a 45-day process with them. Centurion, on the other hand, we commit to a 28-day process. Likewise, adjudication timeframes are all very well and good, and total timeframes are great, but how long does it take to actually get your money from the schemes? The timeframes disclosed vary considerably from 2 to 12 days, and obviously the longer it takes, the less happy the landlord's going to be. 12 days is the longest, which is Reposit, and it must be noted that this is an average. So some will take longer than others, and care needs to be taken around this. Zero Deposit and Centurion offer the smallest payout at 2 days. Ultimately, when considering what a scheme offers, you need to look at how it engages with you, how you engage with it, as well as the total timeframes. Likewise, you need to consider what happens if the scheme ceases to trade, runs into financial difficulty, the what ifs, as we call it, and whether the landlord is truly protected. So under the current offerings, they fall into 3 categories: unsecured, insurance product, and insurance backed. Unsecured is where they're trading on their own balance sheet. You are relying purely on them, and you're a credit default risk. If they go bust, you'll fall into an unsecured creditor. Insurance product, is where they have an insurance product that they issue rather than being insurance backed. Insurance backed, you're relying on the scheme's own balance sheet and then ultimately an insurance company that stands behind them. Looking at the current providers, Flatfare is unsecured. They say they use an escrow account, although we have been unable to find evidence of this. What is not clear is how much is put into the escrow account, who controls it, what happens if Flatfare ceases to trade. Zero deposits, they are very open, they issue their guarantees through a Guernsey-based insurer. So you are exposed to a Guernsey risk rather than a UK risk. Reposit and Centurion are both insurance backed, and we believe this provides the best safety nets for all concerned. What about FCA authorisation and FSCS protection? Zero Deposit and Reposit both say they're FCA authorised and trade off this to a greater or lesser degree. Ultimately, these products are not authorised or regulated by the FCA. As such, you need to ask yourselves, is the FCA authorisation relevant? And what do you gain from this? And I would be going and asking these service providers, what is the benefit of your product and your offering? Because it is unclear to us. And it'll be interesting to see what they say, in particular around the FSCS access, which we don't believe anybody can actually currently have. In summary, there are currently 4 main providers in the space. Cover ranges between 5 and 10 weeks. Cost-wise, there is a clear winner over both value as well as coverage. There are also clear winners around personal service and tailored services. Revenue share opportunities obviously exist for all parties, and then you need to consider the what-if scenarios. If you take one thing away from this very quick presentation, is the what-if scenarios. What if something happens to that scheme provider? Where does this leave my landlord? Finally, I'd be shouted at if I did not put up a slide that explained why Centurion. I'm not going to go through all of these because I'm very conscious of time and there are questions already. However, the only thing that I will say is we do see significant change in this marketplace over the next 6 months. We are working on exciting products and new offerings, and they will be coming out ready for the Renters' Rights Bill. I would like to obviously thank you for listening to me. I apologise that has been a little bit rushed towards the end. I was conscious of time. My contact details are on the screen. Obviously, happy to answer any questions now, Jenny, with a short time left. Otherwise, do contact me direct and I'll get some answers out to you. Jenny, are there?
Lovely, thank you. Thank you. And we do have 3 questions, if you'd like me to go through them now.
Yes, please.
First question is, clients are looking for solvent tenants. What is the rationale of providing any alternative deposit scheme in the first place? Is this to help against or help agents rent quickly or something else?
So it's a combination. So it's both help agents rent quickly, provide double the protection that landlords would normally get from a traditional deposit. What we need to remember is all the tenants on these schemes still need to pass normal referencing and eligibility criteria. So they are solvent already. This is not a product for the tenants who are struggling.
Lovely, thank you. The second question is, can you confirm that you are saying that the other schemes use the previously given card details illegally to claim funds back from the tenants?
No, it's not illegal. It's written into their terms and conditions. It is a quick route to try and gather their payments back. I'm not suggesting there's anything illegal about it. It is an accepted practice and it is written into their terms and conditions.
Lovely, thank you. The last question, you said this is a guarantee. Is it an insurance policy or warranty, so not FCA regulated?
So this product is not FCA regulated. It is an insurance-backed guarantee. So if something happens to Centurion, we have an insurance company that is UK regulated that can step in and basically steps into our shoes and pays out the landlord and makes sure all of the liabilities are paid out in full. So it's an insurance-backed product. It is not an insurance product itself.
Lovely, thank you, Paul. That's all the questions that have come through for the webinar. Would you like to go over the ones that you have sent to you already?
Yes. I'm very conscious of time. Will this run on slightly if I do go over?
No, don't worry, it's no problem.
Okay. So a couple of questions that were submitted earlier. One of them was, can the guarantees be issued mid-tenancy? Centurion certainly do issue mid-tenancies, and we move them through, and that releases the original deposit to the tenant. I'm aware of other schemes that offer it as well, so other providers do the same. Another big question for us that we keep being asked is, do we offer these products to corporate tenants and landlords? We do offer them to corporate tenants and landlords, particularly in the HMO space. So it's very important to remember that it doesn't have to be an individual. We can have companies, trusts, foundations, and other people using our product sources. Another common question is, what if the amount claimed by the landlord exceeds the 10 weeks? So for Centurion, our liability is capped at 10 weeks. We do recover the amounts from the tenant themselves, and we will progress that through the court process. Where a claim by the landlord exceeds the 10 weeks, we will add their claim amount to ours, and we will take that through the court process and try and recover it from the tenant. So we will try and help the tenant recover that money through the normal process that we would use at no cost to them. Another key question, which is very important to us, and this came out in the recent landlord shows we did, is what happens if the tenant doesn't pay the renewal fee? So 3 out of the 4 schemes insist on renewal fees being paid annually. I can't speak for the other schemes, but for Centurion, we continue with the guarantee and it continues in force, and we will pursue the tenant for any outstanding renewal fees as part of the end of tenancy process. So the landlord's not at risk if the tenant stops paying. We are always looking after the landlord in this instance. And then there's 2 final questions left. What do you believe the default rates are? Because obviously we spoke at the start of them about what landlords believe and what other schemes believe potentially, and the traditional deposit schemes. We, from our side, believe that we have roughly an 18% claim rate on our book. Of that 18%, we recover from the tenants in all but 3% of the cases. So we only have 3%, which is a true loss rate on our books that we don't believe we'll ever recover from the tenants. So we're at an 18% claim rate and a 3% alternate loss rate. And then the real final question that has come out, and I think is very important, is, can agents and landlords offer more than one scheme? You would have heard me saying earlier in the presentation that Flatfare is cheaper than Centurion in some instances. You may prefer deposit or zero deposit because of what they offer. From our side, Centurion side, we don't tie you in to one scheme. We quite encourage you, in fact, to offer more than one scheme and give your tenants the option of which one they would prefer, and your landlords the option. And therefore you pick the right scheme and the best scheme for them. Those were the questions we had pre-submitted. Jenny, I don't know if there's any more that have come in.
Yes, we've just had one more, Paul. Would you accept a third party to pay your fee? This person works with a charity who provide interest-free loans for the deposit. Would you accept the payment from them? How do you work with the tenant agent for repayment?
So from a payment perspective, there are 2 routes that Centurion operates. The first one is that the agent collects the payment themselves, or the second one is that we get a copy of the application and we collect the payments for them and notify them once we've got the payment. So we proactively notify the agent once we're ready for the guarantee. We do accept third-party payments for the fees. We are happy to take it from the landlord, the tenant, charities or other organisations, including employers, as well as local authorities. So we do accept the third parties. We are very conscious that other providers in the marketplace won't. They insist on the payment going direct to them via a UK debit card typically, and they use that as part of some of the checks that they perform. But Centurion, absolutely, we will accept it from whoever we need to, and we will proactively work with the agents to get through any of the hurdles of any oddities that they find.
Lovely. Thank you, Paul. There are no more questions. I'd just like to say thank you for delivering today's webinar, and thank you to everyone who joined us. We hope you found the session informative and valuable. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you all as well from me.
Goodbye.